All right, guys, this is our first distance learning video. We are going to be reviewing a topic that you covered in Math 1, Pythagorean Theorem. So this will be something important for what we are learning in the coming weeks called trig. But before we jump into that, I thought it'd be good to spend some time just reviewing this, okay? So I would make sure that you have your notebook, a piece of paper, something to write on. Make sure you're tracking along with me and copying down what's on my notes, okay? All right, so our essential question, just like we have in class, is how can you use the Pythagorean theorem, I'm going to abbreviate this, to solve a right triangle. Okay, so guys, if you remember, Pythagorean theorem has an equation or a formula associated with it. We can only use it to solve right triangles, which means if you look at this picture down here, it contains a right angle, okay? So in this box right here, I'm going to write the formula. A squared plus B squared equals C squared, okay? So guys, each of these letters represents one of the sides in the triangle. And the C that's over here on this side of the equation by itself is always the longest side or the hypotenuse. So if you're taking notes, maybe out to the side you say, draw an arrow, always the hypotenuse, which is the long side across from the right angle, okay? A and B can be either leg. I could put A at the top or B, but those two letters always represent the shorter sides that form the right angle, okay? So what we're going to be doing in the examples is, given two of these lengths, numbers, we are going to be solving for one of the sides that we don't know, okay? So when it says, how do you use the Pythagorean theorem to solve a right triangle, that's basically saying to solve for a missing side, okay? So just to recap, C is the hypotenuse across from the right angle. A and B are always the legs. Okay, let's just write this over to the side. A and B are always the legs. And when I say legs, that is referring to the two shorter sides. Okay, and then little star, C is the big, long, funny word, hypotenuse. Okay, so if you need to take a second, pause the video, make sure you have all of this stuff, add anything, maybe I said something that stuck out to you, add that in the margin. Okay, all right, so example 1. And again, take a second, pause the video, copy the example down. All right, so in this example, we are missing the hypotenuse, okay? So the first thing I would do on each of these problems, write down A equals, B equals, C equals. That way when we plug in our formula, it's very clear where we got those numbers from, okay? So remember, like we wrote at the top, A and B are always the legs that form the right angle, which in this case are 3 and 4. And like I mentioned, we could do 4 and 3. It really wouldn't matter here. Doesn't really matter as long as they're the legs, okay? And then the hypotenuse is what we're solving for. That's x, okay? So I'm going to rewrite the formula. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And then I'm going to plug in these numbers that I know, okay? So A is 3. The squared is part of the formula, so that stays. Plus 4 squared equals x squared, okay? So, like I said, writing this down at the beginning makes it a lot easier when you substitute your numbers in, okay? All right, simple math, 3 squared is another way of saying 3 multiplied by itself, which is 9, plus 4 squared is 16, equals x squared. So guys, remember when you're solving an equation, the best thing to do is to perform one operation at a time, write it out, and then do the next operation. Don't get ahead of yourself because you will make a mistake, okay? All right, 9 plus 16 is 25. Okay, now remember, we learned this at the beginning of the year. When I have x raised to the power of 2, I have to use a special operation to cancel out the exponent. So what I'm going to do on both sides is take the square root, because that is the opposite operation for something squared. Okay, so remember, when I do that, this cancels out the squared, and I'm left with x. Okay? And then on the other side of the equation, the square root of 25, another way of saying, what number multiplied by itself equals 25 is 5. Okay? And guys, negative 5 is also an answer here because negative 5 times negative 5 is positive. But since we're dealing with a measurement, we don't consider negative answers. Okay? All right, we are done. We found our missing side. That right triangle has been solved. All right, moving on to example 2. Okay, so same thing. We're going to write down A equals, B equals, C equals. Okay, so here I can see in my triangle I'm missing a leg. So I'm either solving for A or B. Doesn't really matter which one we say is which. The only letter that matters here is the hypotenuse. 25 has to be C. Okay, so I'm going to say A is 7, B is our H. Or you could do A is H, B is 7, you'll get the same answer. Okay? And at some point, you won't have to write down the formula and the letters. You can just plug it in. Okay? All right, so A is 7, B is H, and then C is 25 squared. Okay, so this time, as opposed to the last time, we aren't solving for what's by itself on the right. We are solving for one of the legs. Okay, all right, 7 squared is 49. 25 squared is a really big number, 625. Okay. All right, so now we see that what we want by itself is right here, the H. So we need to use the inverse operation for this positive 49 on both sides, which is minus. Okay. And then when we do that, when we subtract from both sides, what you do to one side, you must do to the other. This cancels, and we have what we want by itself, H squared. Okay. All right, when you subtract 625 minus 49, a good trick when you have a 9 on the end, I think of 625 minus 50 would be 575, and then since I had that 1 that added to make 50, I'm going to add 1 here. Okay? So 575 plus 1 would be 576. Okay? And then I can check 576 plus 49. 6 plus 9 is 15. 8 plus 4 is 12. And I get 625. Or you can just type it in your calculator. Either way works. Okay? So I've got 576. And then I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And I get H, let me type this one on my calculator, I think it's 24. I haven't had my coffee, so my mental math is slow. Yep, 24. Okay, so we solved for the missing leg, and we got H equals 24. Okay, so guys, again, at this point, if you missed any of that, I know I go through it pretty quickly. Pause the video. Make sure you're following each of the steps. Go back if you need to. Whatever you need to do. Okay? All right, let's move on. So in our last few examples, each of the answers that we got were pretty numbers. They didn't have decimals, there were no square roots, but that isn't always the case. Sometimes you will have non-pretty answers, okay? We don't want to call them ugly. All right, so same thing. We're going to write down our A, our B, and our C. We get A is 5, B is 8. Those are my legs. We could flip-flop those, but we'll have the same answer. And then C is Y that we are solving for, okay? So we've got 5 squared plus 8 squared equals Y squared, okay? All right, so this is going to give me 25 plus 64 equals Y squared. When I add 25 with 64, I get 89. So if you think about 89, I know I'm going to have to take the perfect square. I'm going to have to take the square root to take away this exponent. And I know that 89 is not a perfect square. So my answer here is not going to look like the pretty answers that I had on examples 1 and 2. Okay? So when we take that square root on both sides, this becomes Y. But since we cannot simplify this, we are just going to leave it written as the square root of 89, which is 9 point something. Okay? We want to keep it exact, so we're just going to leave it as it is and not find that decimal answer. Okay? If you wanted to find the decimal, you can use the calculator on your phone or on Google. And let's see, I'll just calculate it real quick and we'll see what we get. Square root of 80. That is about 9.43. So if you had a question where it said, please round to the nearest tenth, 2 decimal places, you would give 9.43. Okay? All right, moving on to example 4. Okay, so here, let's skip this section. Okay, I feel like at this point, we probably can just plug it into the formula and start solving. Okay, so I'm solving for one of the legs. So I've got P squared plus 9 squared equals 12 squared. My 2 lost his hat. Okay, so P squared plus 81 is equal to 144. And if you're not able to do the perfect squares in your head, that's totally fine, but hopefully after we have done these a few times, you'll start to have them memorized, okay? So here, again, like I had on the last one, where we weren't solving for the hypotenuse, we have to get P by itself, so I've got to use the inverse operation for plus 81, which we know is subtraction. All right, this cancels. I bring my P squared down, and when I subtract 144 minus 81, I get 63, okay? I'm going to use my inverse to take away the exponent to solve for P, and I get the square root of 63. Okay, so guys, this is not a perfect square. There's no number multiplied by itself that equals 63, but if you think back to what we did around Christmas time, this number is divisible by 9. So if I divide 63 by 9, I get 7. So we are going to rewrite this as the square root of 9 times the square root of 7, okay? Remember, if that number is divisible by a perfect square, you have to break it apart, okay? So when I do that, I'm running out of room here, square root of 9 becomes 3, and then square root of 7 cannot be simplified, okay? So this would be my final answer, okay? I had a challenge problem at the end. I'm not going to go through that since we're kind of running short on time, but I will put it here, and if you feel like you want to try it, I can give you the solution for that. But it is a little challenging because instead of just a variable, you have a number added on. So try that. Let me know if you need some help. At this point, go back, make sure that you didn't miss anything in the video. I think it's a good idea at the bottom of your notes to answer the essential question, and then you can get started on the practice.